Aloha, this is Rosa McAllister, and welcome back to On Being a Service Warrior, interviews with the firewalkers among us. Those who have had their struggles and yet have chosen to come out the other side into lives of service for others. Click subscribe and tap the notification bell to keep up with future episodes of this ongoing series. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to catch up with other episodes in this series, as well as other offerings in Network's YouTube channel. Mahalo, thank you, and always remember you are the light. Be the light. Hi everyone, this is Rosa McAllister from Networks for Training and Development, and we're here again for another interview with the On Being a Service Warrior series. We've had a little hiatus here in terms of recording interviews for this series of late for a variety of reasons, including the ongoing coronavirus pandemic thing that's happening here. I should mention that we are recording this, it is December 3rd, 2020. And yes, we are in the throes of this COVID coronavirus thing that seems to be resurging or continuing on relentlessly. I'm not sure what you would call it. But because of that and a number of different things, we've needed to take a little pause in these recordings. But we're back, and I'm so happy to be with an old colleague and a friend today, Terrence Clinkscales, as I knew him, now known as TT Stern-Enzi. T and I worked together at Networks for many years. He was always that kind of calm in the face of flurry within our small training and consulting nonprofit organization. He was the funny one-liner kind of guy who was up for any shenanigans we might think of. And there were some good ones. I have pictures too. And he was also always the gentle, soulful, deep thinker who was so much wiser than his years. T had many interests and angles and perspectives and helped us greatly as an organization to step deeper into our mission and to do it with real heart and soul. And he also helped us each personally see ourselves in our own personal missions. He left us at Networks, many years ago, and moved from Philadelphia and journeyed on to his next chapters, exciting as they are. And through the years, we've stayed a bit in touch and more recently have connected again in a wonderful new way, still diving into issues of culture and race and disability, rights, inclusive lives, and so much more. And now also films. T is helping us at Networks again in a few new ventures, and those of you that are connected with us will see his wonderful face around often, I hope. I am so happy and thrilled to be talking with TT Stern-Enzi today, and just know we will all learn much from him. And Terrence, thank you ever so much for agreeing to interview and for being my buddy for so many years. I was trying to remember how many years, and I'm not so good at that.
You know what? I have been kind of playing around with that too, and I think it goes back to 1992 or 3.
Okay, we incorporated in 92. So it was, I knew it was not long after that, but I could not remember when.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it does go back to 92.
Wow. And then you were with us for how long? I really am I would say since last year, but I know that's not true.
I left in September of 2000. So I think
wow.
I think I was actually officially with Networks from maybe 95 or 96 through 2000. But again, our paths definitely crossed from 92 to again that period where I officially signed on, and then 2000, because I have been in Cincinnati now 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of a weird journey for me, and place to be at this stage in the journey.
Wow. Well, and we're going to hear more of that. So, for those of you that might be new to this interview series that I've been doing, I think this is lucky number 13 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, interview. It's not even a year old, and it was just kind of an idea that had been brewing within me for a long time to talk with people that I know of who maybe their life has been interesting, certainly, and maybe not of the ordinary ilk, if there is such a thing. And for whatever reason within our life and our life experience, we've decided to walk through fires and come out the other side, choosing to be of service to others. I call us service warriors, hence the title of the series on being a service warrior. So I've been thrilled to interview so many interesting, great people, and I have lists of many others. And this is so much fun to be with you. But the rule is there are, as I've shared with you, and I've shared in other interviews, there's 5 basic questions that I ask of everyone. I started the series asking the 5 questions of myself. I didn't think that it was right or good to expect anybody else to disclose or talk about stuff if I didn't do it myself. So I was the first interview, if you will, using the same 5 questions. I make sure that you get them beforehand, so you know what's coming. I don't pull zingers. I'm not a Barbara Walters, Baba Wawa kind of girl. Interview style, I hope. And the other rule is, caveat here is, just share as much as you'd be willing to share. Some people like to just talk and it's just a conversation and off they go and they kind of sort of hit the 5 questions, and others prefer to actually be interviewed and ask the questions. And I think this is going to turn out maybe a combo of the two. We'll see. Which is interesting because those of you who don't know, I'm interviewing an interviewer. So this should be very interesting in many ways. So the first question is, so who are you? How would you describe yourself? And if maybe that's because that's a little weird for many of us. But if I were to ask 3 to 5 people who know you well, how might they describe you? I already gave a little bit. What do you do? What are you all about? How might you answer that?
It's it's interesting because, of course, you did give me these questions up front, and I had an idea for this first response. But bear with me because I feel like I need to already jump off a little bit, something a little differently, because as you were introducing me, you brought up the fact that I completely have forgotten this, and it happens ever so often, that I've changed my name. So the mere idea of asking me who I am, I have to remember the fact that the name that I go by now, which I actually do formally use Terrence Todd Stern-Enzi as sort of my legal name. It's on my passport. I have a new social security card with it and all that kind of stuff. But you're right. I was, and I guess there's still some part of me in there who initially was Terrence Todd Clinkscales, and I haven't said that in a number of years, which is kind of interesting and exciting because I got married back in 2006, and as part of making that decision to get married, it was my first marriage. I was in my 30s, and I had some very specific kinds of ways of thinking about taking this step and who I imagined that I was going to become as part of that process. And I happened to be marrying someone who was married before and had kids and was on her own journey as well. And part of that journey, she's a trained jazz vocalist and was starting to perform again. And I remember us having a conversation about getting married and names. And I told her, I was like, okay, I've lived with Clinkscales all my life. I'm not sure that's the easiest name to have, especially if you're performing and have to promote that. And I was kind of like, it's a mouthful. It's kind of weird. We don't have to stick to it. We don't have to stick with the traditional kind of, thing where you're going to take my name. And to be quite honest, I told her that I wasn't as wedded, if you will, to the name Clinkscales anyway, because it was my father's name, obviously, but I, at that point, had never met my father. I was raised by my mother, who was a single parent, and I had his name, but nothing else that I knew of. So I was kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I can give that up. We can make up our own name. We can establish our own kind of joint identity together. And she, weirdly enough, agreed to go along with me with that idea. So we took about a month and kind of talked through and debated what it would look like to change our names, how we would kind of come up with that new name. And she ended up choosing Stern, which was part of her maiden name, Sternheim. And I didn't want to keep either Clink or Scales. So I did a lot of research and looked at baby books and naming books and all that kind of stuff, and found Enzi, which means power in Swahili, and was kind of like, okay, yeah, it's short and it's sweet. And I was like, okay, and it can go with Stern. So we had already kind of made the decision that we would start with Stern and end with Enzi. And the really cool part of that is Stern, as it's derived from German, means star. So when we put it all together, our name means star power in two different languages, which we thought was really cool and kind of exciting at the time. And we also recognized the fact that, again, for us, it felt kind of vital and important to create something new and something that didn't belong to anyone else. And as a matter of fact, we are the only two Stern-Enzis in the world. And it will more than likely stay that way unless, I guess it's kind of fingers crossed in a way, in a strange way. But my stepkids have been recently talking about the idea that one or both of them might want to change their names and become Stern-Enzis, which I would never push on them at all, or want them to necessarily do, although there is that little secret part of me that's kind of excited that they would, feel, that they would want to honor us in that way by taking that name on. So we'll see. It hasn't happened yet, but if it doesn't, I'm fine with my wife and I being the only two Stern-Enzis. But if our kids take the name on, there's no greater tribute I think that they can give to us, or that anything that I could pass on to them, other than, the time and presence that I've already given them. So
that is pretty cool. I did not know this history at all, and I wondered about the Stern-Enzi. And I've met Jessica a little bit through social media, and how wonderful. Yeah. And I think it, for your two kids to even consider the possibility of that, I think speaks to what they've seen in the two of you and what you have brought to their lives particularly.
Yeah. And I think this is a great segue too, back to, I guess, the way that I was initially going to try to answer this question. And in terms of trying to define myself, I start with kind of the basics. I'm my mother's son. I am a brother in very interesting and different ways to two incredible young men who are both younger than me, significantly younger than me in some cases. So yes, I'm a brother, I'm a son. Obviously with Jessica, I'm a husband, and probably most importantly, I am a step parent of, again, two really amazing children. And that is the easiest and best way to kind of start figuring out who I am. I think being a husband is obviously the would seemingly be the bigger role of all of those at this stage for me. But now that my kids are getting older, my youngest is almost out of the teenage years now, and the oldest is out of college, and doing an AmeriCorps internship with the Homeless Coalition here in Cincinnati. And I look at the two of them and the time that I spend with them. I have always kind of in my head imagined that if I could at all be half sort of the parent or step parent to them that my stepfather was to me. Because again, like I said, I mentioned earlier that I didn't know my father, or at least I hadn't. I only met him one time before he died. So my stepfather, who married my mother when I was in college, I was a junior in college when they met and married, which meant that in effect I was 20 years old. I was grown for all intents and purposes. He, other than just being a good man in my mother's life, he did not necessarily have to necessarily do anything at all with me to have a relationship. We lived in different cities. I would see them once or twice a year, but he has now been in my life over 30 years, and he's my pops. I love him to death. My mom would probably argue that there are times that she probably thinks I love him more than I love her, which is not true, but it's pretty darn close because he's an amazing man. And all of those things that you initially said about me in terms of kind of being that quiet, gentle, kind of easygoing kind of guy, that's Pops for me. He has been those things for me. And so when the time came for me to get married, knowing that Jess had these two kids that, were going to be part of the instant family, my first thought was, okay, well, yeah, if I'm going to be a step parent, and knowing that their father was still going to be involved in their lives to a certain extent, I wasn't going to try to replace him or anything like that. But I was just like, you know what, they are going to get another parental figure, and I just want to make sure that they know that I'm always going to be in their corner. They can always talk to me. I'm always going to be there. And I was like, well, yeah, if I can be half the parent that Pops has been to me, then I feel like I would have done a good job. So I guess I could say that again, because they are, now at the stage of even contemplating taking on the Stern-Enzi name, they probably feel that, yeah, I did a pretty good job, and I was a good guy to have around. And
I would say so. But I remember you lovingly, certainly talking about your mom. And I remember you always talking about Pops. Always.
Yeah.
And I just remember saying to Mike, how wonderful you are to have embraced a man coming into your life and stealing your mama away yet also, what a gift he obviously was to you. But I think it speaks also to your character to see that, and to see the joy for your mom, and to accept him as you did, and to open yourself up to that relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted that, to be quite honest. Again, with going to college, and I mean, I was born and raised in North Carolina, and I, as a kid, once I got into college, kind of worried about the idea of my mother and what was going to happen with her. She and my grandmother, who between the two of them, they raised me. I kind of looked at the idea of leaving and going to Philadelphia and thinking, well, what are they going to do? Like they have each other, but I'm not going to be around. And I wanted, especially for my mom, just the idea that she would find someone that she's going to have this whole other lifetime of experiences to share, and to, kind of go on this journey with. And I was like, well, yeah, she needs to have somebody to go on that journey with. And when she met Pops, I was like, okay, then check that box off. She's got to have this person that she can go ahead and have these new experiences with. And honestly, I'm not sure that I ever imagined that I would be a part of that journey or experience. It was just like, that's going to be her life and her new situation. And again, as I would occasionally intersect with them, it was like, that was going to be great. But as life would have it, not only did, Pops and I have the opportunity to establish a relationship together kind of separate from my mother. But, the reality is when I moved here in 2000, part of the package of me coming here was the idea that I was going to be spending time with them. I moved here, I lived with them. What we all initially probably thought was only going to be a year, then turned into several years. And, I had a young brother in the house who was a baby at that point, and I was going to be his legal guardian if anything happened to them. So it was kind of like, well, yeah, I need to be here. I need to spend some time with him. I need to spend time with them, kind of reestablish sort of a different kind of family dynamic. And Quasi, my youngest brother, was a piece of that, but Pops had a son from a previous relationship as well, and he was a part of his life. So Marcellus's family as well, like his mother and other siblings, became another piece of this really growing extended family. And so yeah, my two younger brothers are as much a part of this scenario as Pops was. And again, just the idea that he kind of set the stage for all of that. How the relationship I had with him, which then kind of spilled over, because if you were to see us all together, it would be very easy to look at us not as, a father and three sons, but you could look at it as, a grandfather, a father, maybe a brother, and then a son down the line. But, we are all of the brothers, we're all fiercely devoted to the idea that we are brothers, and Pops is the head of this little random kind of clan of people. And we all adore him. And I would say that we all definitely are aware of his presence and impact on our lives and who we are as people. So yeah, like I said, it just does speaks to him. It speaks to us to a large extent, even though I'm not talking about her as much. It also says a lot about my mom too, because she, like I said, she opened up her life and heart to not only this man, but his son, this whole other relationship as well, who in some ways, Marcellus's mother is as much my mother as his mother too. Mm-hmm. So we have almost like a village, an extended village of relationships that are part of this. And we all love and support each other in whatever ways we can. So I'm excited that my kids got to see that as well, and see that was important to me. And more importantly, that it was just as, meaningful for Jess as well. Her family is, again, my extended family. And, so family is a very loose name for what we are. We just are a group of loving, crazy, food-centric people. And this year in particular, obviously with, COVID and everything else, kind of stretched and strained those connections, because generally speaking, we do the best we can to get together as one really big collective, and we eat and laugh and celebrate together. And we had to figure out different ways to do that this year, but the joy and the fun was still the same, and it was still there. And that's, at least to answer that first question, that's how I would do it. I am a member of one big old ball of love, and I'm hopefully giving as much love as I'm getting from everybody else in that big old ball.
I believe it. How wonderful. Yeah. How wonderful. And that it just keeps extending and reaching out further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. It does. I got to, and I've been excited for the last, I guess, a little over a year or so now. Mick, my oldest, has their girlfriend who has become a part of the family as well. And again, with quarantine, we've had to have these really obviously distant kind of encounters with each other. Usually once a week, the kids come over because they are not living in our house. But most of the time when they come over, Bethany comes over with our kids. And, I am just as excited to, have conversations with her and, kind of see that she appreciates being a part of this and the humor and the laughs. And again, to understand that she's a part of it too. So yeah, there's still more room for, more people to come in and, kind of get embraced by it all. So that's, who knows? You just keep the door open to see who comes in.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you've told us some bits and pieces, and you know me, and you were around when we were doing some of the early days of person-centered planning and walking with people with disabilities who, really had not had control of their lives to try to take more control of their lives. And a big part of that was understanding who they really were and relooking at their lives, not by the big black binders of crappy professional stuff about them, but instead from their own view, who they really were, and from people who loved them, who they really were. And one of the things we always did as part of that, trying to get to know someone, and part of what I've incorporated in here is the idea of asking people that I'm talking with to share a bit about their lives. And you've already done some of that here. I learned from my good buddy Lester, who I know you know, that when we asked him to tell us about his life, he painstakingly told us in his very halting voice over many, many, many hours. And we kind of charted it along the walls. And there was a whole lot of sadness and events that he remembered that would have crushed many. And yet, in the midst of that, he always reminded us too of other parts of the same time frame that were beautiful, and people who believed in him, or people that whatever. And it got me realizing that for most of us, we remember our lives in events and snippets, kind of almost like photographs, when I'm actually more interested in the chapters of life.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, like with Lester, it takes in maybe the sorrowful or the hard times, but it also brings in some other pieces of that. And in hindsight, when we think about the chapters, I think we often usually see the lessons or the whatever else was in there. So the second question is, what have your chapters been? As much as you might want to share with us.
The chapters are interesting for me because, again, the huge beginning was just, again, like I said, being a child of a single parent. And that's a wholly inadequate way of kind of talking about it, because yes, my mother was divorced and raising me, but she had my grandmother, her mother, who was there, and this whole collection of her friends, and some who were actually family, some who were just friends who became family. But again, that whole collective kind of idea was there in my life from the very beginning. So I grew up in that, and that shaped, the early part of my life, and then has obviously had a huge impact on who I am now and how I kind of make my way through the world. So yeah, that was, again, this really great and loving community, and of my mother's friends, which, I still keep in touch with a number of them and their kids. I was probably right in the middle in terms of age, but I was the only male child out of that group. And again, it was a group of women raising their kids, and in most cases, their extended families were largely women as well. So I was surrounded and engulfed by all of this love and attention. And, whether it was my grandmother and my older aunties or my mom and, my aunties who were her age, or even their kids who, like I said, in some cases were older than me, but they were there who in helping to take care of me. Yeah, I grew up just swaddled in love and attention, and it was the greatest experience to have. We were not materially, rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I guarantee you, I probably felt like the richest kid in the world. Just yeah, there I could not walk in anyone's house and not, you know, walk through without getting hugs and kisses and people asking how I was doing or what I wanted or what I needed. And, to a certain extent, you could very easily have imagined me to be this really weirdly spoiled little prince out of all of that. But that wasn't really what it was. It was, again, the love was there, but every last one of them was kind of like, okay, we're preparing you, for the world. You're going to be able to take care of yourself. And so I learned to cook and clean and do all those things. My grandmother in particular was always kind of like, you know what? You don't know that this love and that all these people are always going to be around. So you need to be able to take care of yourself. And, she did. That was her way of kind of preparing me. So again, I was under her elbow in the kitchen from the time I could stand, and I learned to cook. And I went with her, during the days when my mother worked and she was a domestic. So I would go with her and I would help her out. So I learned how to make beds and clean and do whatever I needed to do. And those were those formative kinds of lessons that laid the foundation for, the person that I am now. So that's a huge opening chapter. Um, and there are so many names and faces in there, then stories that I'm never going to be able to tell. But yeah, they're there and they're in my heart and always in my head. And yeah, like I said, it's a great first step. I have, my grandmother's cast iron skillet in our kitchen now that will not let Jess or my kids ever use, because they're not going to take care of it in the same way that my grandmother would, and the way that she raised me to take care of it. So I'm like, yeah, if I'm going to use it, if we're going to use it, I'll use it and no one else touches it, that kind of thing. Or with just having Thanksgiving dinner, I made my grandmother's macaroni and cheese, which my kids this year in particular asked me like, okay, well, is your macaroni and cheese better than your mom's? And I was kind of like, well, we technically use the same recipe, but if my mom really wants it to be made, she will call me and say, hey, will you make your grandmother's macaroni and cheese? I'm like, okay, she must think I do a pretty good job with it, because
Wow.
she'll call me and ask me to make it. So I'm like, okay, I guess that means that I'm the best at it.
Mm.
So yeah, that's, like I said, it's those kinds of things. And I cannot wait, to be quite honest. And, we didn't necessarily raise our kids in the same way that I was raised, but we did talk about it just last week, that I want to make sure that both of my kids learn how to make mac, because they both love them. They love it to death. They love the recipe. And I'm like, well, yeah, at some point, yeah, you guys need to have that recipe, because yeah, when I go, I want somebody still making my grandmother's macaroni and cheese in the world. So yeah, it'll be your recipe to pass on to your kids. So those are the kinds of things that are part of that first chapter for me. And interestingly enough, I am in the midst of maybe not the next chapter, but a really kind of strange and fascinating family chapter in my life and in my story right now, because I obviously mentioned that several times that I didn't know my father, but I did meet him about 6 years ago, right before he died. And my mother was pretty instrumental in helping kind of set up the connection for me to go back to North Carolina to see him. And I got to spend about a half hour with him. He was a Vietnam vet dealing with addiction issues. But more importantly, he was also a man who comes from a family with a long line of cancer, in particular prostate cancer. So obviously I was in my 40s at that stage, and my mother and Jess had been on me repeatedly about making sure that I'm having my annual checkups and, taking care of everything. And I was like, okay, yes, yes, yes. And I had spent most of my life not really caring to meet my father one way or the other. I just didn't feel like I needed him. I had my mother and all my aunties and my grandmother early in life, and then pops later on, and the family that I helped to put together for myself along the way, which I probably haven't mentioned it, but the Networks family was a huge part of that for me in the '90s. So you guys were, you know, that family away from home that I had and needed at that point. So you know, yeah, I had all of these great substitutes and felt like I didn't necessarily need to connect with him, but hitting 40 and having these tests and knowing, for instance, that my grandfather, his father, died of prostate cancer in the mid 90s. And, at that time when I started to think about reaching out to him, he was one of four children, three male children, as a matter of fact. And he had an older brother who died of prostate cancer a couple of years before I went down to meet him. Um, and I still have a surviving uncle who has dealt with several bouts of prostate cancer. And yeah, I just had reached a stage where I felt like I needed to put a face, not just to this man as him being my father, but I had to put a face and an identity to this inherited history that I was connected to, that I didn't know and had never been formally had to face before. So I went to see him. We had the talk. He died about a year later, and I got the closure to a certain extent that I needed from him. But it opened up this door to sort of the inherited health issues, and I'm in the midst of kind of dealing with that right now too. Like I've always prided myself on taking care of myself and my health. I watched what I would eat, and when I was in Philly and working at Networks, I was running an awful lot at that age, and was really excited to be active and fit and taking care of myself. And this family history was one of those things that was kind of troubling to me, because it didn't matter what I did. I could watch what I eat. I could run as many miles as I wanted to, every week, or play basketball as often as I wanted to with guys that were half my age or whatever else. But that wasn't going to change anything in terms of, this particular cancer and what was going to happen with me. So it's like, okay, yeah, I have to reconcile myself to the idea that this is something that I need to be diligent about and be focused on. And it is not something that I find to be particularly scary or, leading me to have any undue anxiety. It's just more the idea that it's just like, this is frankly kind of an inevitability. And I have to be smart about preparing to meet it. Because
Right.
if and when it happens, if
Yeah.
I'm on top of it, it can be treated, and I can continue and go on and have a good and healthy life.
That's
But
right.
I need to be focused on making sure that I do the things that I need to do to be prepared.
Right.
So I was not as excited about the prospect of that, let's say, in my late 30s into my early 40s. As a matter of fact, before I went to meet my father, I was probably very resistant
Mm.
to that. And I would get annoyed with, Jess and my mother when they were like, hey, when you go for your annual checkup, make sure you're getting checked. I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. Yeah, leave me alone. I'm a grown man. I know what I'm doing. And there's still a little bit of that in me, but not over this particular issue. In this
Mm-hmm.
particular case, it's like, yeah, I do understand this and know that I need to be as prepared and mindful about it as possible. And it's placed me, and again, I think this is a chapter that I think for a lot of people would be scarier, or again
Mm-hmm.
have that anxiety and all that. But it's like I don't feel that way at all. I think there's a lesson to be learned from this as well, just to be able to kind of tell people and share that, okay, yeah, it's an obstacle that you have to deal with. Life is going to be full of them. You have to figure out how you want to meet them. And maybe the example that I'm kind of offering is a way to say, okay, well, yeah, this is how
Mm-hmm.
you can meet it,
Mm-hmm.
and face it, and not be afraid of it. So
Right.
yeah,
And still live. And still
yeah,
live.
and still
And
live, and still
yeah,
do as much as you can and you want to
that's
do,
right.
and to not feel that there are any limits to what to the life that you want to lead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, if I can do that, then it allows me to explore those other avenues and chapters with as much openness
Mm-hmm.
as I can, to know that each and every one of those chapters and each and every one of those moments are going to be precious and exciting in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was
So,
not necessarily planning on thinking about that as a chapter in my life, but
hey,
yeah,
sometimes these things present themselves.
yeah, yeah.
So, how did you get to Philly? How'd that happen? I'm not sure if that was a chapter in and of itself or part of another chapter or.
It yeah, it kind of was a sort of a chapter. It's part of an interesting chapter of on its own. I again grew up and was in North Carolina in Asheville, and I got the opportunity. I had a friend who his family had all attended this really prestigious prep school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he left Asheville High to go as a freshman to go to the Macaulay School for Boys in Chattanooga. His brother had gone before him and his father before him. So he went that first year, had a marvelous time, and he would come back on breaks and he would tell me, like, this is the place for you. Asheville, and especially at the time that I was, again, when I was in high school, junior high and high school, we had the worst school system in the country. We were in the bottom three. There were not going to be that many opportunities necessarily for, a Black kid being raised by a single parent living in the projects to have a chance to kind of break out and get away and to do something different. So my friend Joe was like, yeah, this place will give you that opportunity. You need to come check it out. So during our sophomore year, he talked to the admissions team, got me a spot for an interview. They flew me over. I had a whirlwind tour, loved the school, and recognized right away, it's like, well, yeah, whatever I thought I wanted to do, this would be the place that would get me there. So I was like, okay, yeah, I need to do this. And my mother, God love her, was just like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. She was always that way. She was like, school, summer programs, whatever it was, if something came up and someone told her, yeah, your kid needs to do this, she was like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. So she dove into figuring out the Macaulay thing, got me there during my junior year. And I think leading up to that, I kind of had this idea or this dream that I wanted to go to an Ivy League school. But at that time, it was Columbia. I had been to New York at least, and I was kind of like, well, okay, be cool to go to school in New York, in the city. Columbia's an Ivy League school. I'm like, okay, that's where I want to go. I had no knowledge of programs or anything that I wanted to study or anything else. It was just like, that's where I want to go to school. So when I got to Macaulay, and then we had all of these college counselors and, college recruiters who were coming in from all over the country, that was kind of like, well, wow, all these people are here looking for us, looking for a chance to recruit us. And I don't know that I necessarily like lost my interest in Columbia, or it was just more the idea that apparently every year the recruiter from Penn would come to campus, and there was always one student at Macaulay who would seriously look at Penn. And if you were that one student, you had seemingly unlimited access to that person and their attention and their efforts to help get you into Penn. And from my junior year, I made the switch and decided that, okay, I wanted to be that kid that they were going to spend that time and attention on. And Philadelphia and Penn became it. And sure enough, that was it. I made that decision. I got into the Wharton School of Business. Did not know anything at all about the business school or anything else. It was literally just a box on the application that I checked off, which, looking back, I think that was one of the strangest and dumbest choices I've ever made in my life. But I got in, and that was it. And in 1987, I left the South, went to Philadelphia, and got to Penn and the Wharton School. And of course, I'm looking at the names of the distinguished, or in some cases illustrious kinds of alums that were there at the time. And Michael Milliken's name came up, and our current president was among that list as well. And I knew immediately once I was there, I was like, God, I don't want to be one of these guys. But everyone I knew was trying to get in. So I felt like, okay, I guess I should stay in here. They're going to teach me something and give me all these access to contacts and people in this world that might be useful in some way. But I hated all of my business classes, hated them with a passion. I stuck it out. I took a bunch of classes where I got to study film as text, whether they were English classes or communications classes or whatever else, and did just enough to get the business degree. And when I needed to figure out what to do for a job, fortuitously, I graduated right at the time that obviously the ADA, is kind of makes its play in the world, and the discussion about using that piece of legislation to open up the world to people with disabilities in ways that businesses were looking to bring people into the workforce. I remember pitching to Horizon House, which is where I got my start, pitching the idea that, okay, you need someone with this kind of business experience or the ability to speak the language of that particular world to help bring people into that world. So I was like, I should be the perfect choice for that. And I was smooth talking enough to make that happen. And that's how I got my first job. And it's what kept me in Philadelphia. And without that opportunity and that ability to keep me in Philly, not only would I have not met any of you guys, but in large part, I feel like I'm not sure if I would be doing what I'm doing now, with film being such an important part of my life. Because while I was working, in this nonprofit social service world, there was this whole other life that I had outside of that Philadelphia gave me the chance to find an art scene, to find a film community that was going to inspire and inflame my passions in a lot of ways, that prepared me for the chapter that would come when I moved here. And I still remember the idea of working at networks And I felt like I would leave for the weekend, and I would spend my little time in that bubble of how many films could I see in a weekend, or how many books could I read, and I had no idea what I was doing with all of that stuff. It was just like these are just experiences. I've got to keep collecting them. And I would come back and we would work during the week, and I would sprinkle it in throughout work. But it was like, well, is that really what I need to be doing with it? I have no idea. But let's keep like hoarding all of that stuff, all of those experiences, that culture, and that was becoming a part of my identity. And again, Philadelphia fed that in ways that I'm sure I could have and probably would have done the same kinds of things. But yeah, the Philadelphia Film Festival, the films that I saw as part of that, and the ability to kind of walk and soak it all up. Um, yeah, it was this. Yeah, I don't know that I would have been quite the same anywhere else for me.
Mm.
Um,
And I remember those times so well. I remember, saying to you, well, let's infuse some of that into some of the training that we're
mhm,
doing. What's a movie cut, or what's a song, or what's a book, or what's a whatever that we need to put in there, because you're not the only one. Mike and I love movies, and maybe not with the same fervor as you, but well, let's infuse it in there. Let's use this. How can we do this? And I remember you turning me on to certain music that I didn't know, and me
mhm,
turning you on to other music that you didn't
yeah,
know. And
yeah,
it was all of that kind of, with our little weird eclectic family within networks, sharing that and embracing one another's interests and seeing how can we fit that in. It's all
mhm,
work.
yeah,
Work is life. Life is work. It's all
yeah.
blurs and blends.
And it was really important too. And this is definitely takes me to where I am now as a festival programmer and a critic, and as a person of color, kind of looking at and seeing, some of those ways that you guys allowed me to insert film and this critical look at film into what we were doing as part of networks. I remember specifically being able to take clips from Rain Man and
Hmm.
Forrest Gump and kind of say, well, wait a minute, are these really accurate and authentic ways of looking at people with disabilities in the world? Is this the kind of reflection that we want to have? And if it's not, which obviously I was pushing and leading,
Hmm.
with those questions, but it's like, okay, if it's not, then we have a responsibility as a community, and and I say it now in particular as a member of this industry as a whole, to be able to say, what are we doing to come up with better representations? Because as a Black man, grew up watching films for years, for decades, without truly meaningful representations of my experience. Um, but also knowing that, again, there were Black filmmakers who were out there who were trying to find ways to tell their stories, or tell different stories that would be a little more reflective of our community. Um, we are now at a stage where, the disability community is finding, you know, themselves in the same kind of struggles, trying to say, well, how can we take command of our stories, and how
Right.
can we make sure they get presented in a way that feel authentic to us?
and
And
and and are actually presented by us and not by people who are playing somebody with
right,
a disability.
right,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Much the
that,
same as
yeah,
Black people have done and women have done, and
hmm,
absolutely.
yeah. And I feel like that is the role that I have now. Like I said, as a festival programmer and as a critic, to be able to say that, okay, I understand that struggle from my perspective and my group. Is there a way, either as an ally or an associate or whatever label you want to put on it, is there a way for me to help someone else, on their journey, to be able to tell their stories? If there is an opportunity and a way for me to do that, then let's roll up our sleeves, and I'll roll up my sleeves, and I'm gonna do what I can to help figure that out. So that's also a really interesting and kind of inspiring place and chapter that I'm in right now. Because yeah, that's kind of, like I said, that's the next step along the way for me to sort of say, well, there's an opportunity to kind of leave a legacy behind. And I've struggled with that over the last few years. Like I get to take advantage of things as a critic and go to festivals and do things, or, you know, with having a wife who's a singer and having access to being able to go to New York and go to jazz clubs and know people in that world. But here in Cincinnati, our festival is new. You know, we have a community that doesn't have the same level of exposure and access to things. We could have very easily have left and gone back to Philly or gone to New York or gone out west and found a community that had all of the things that we cared about and that were important to us. But I remember telling my wife, I was like, yeah, I'd feel like a sponge if I kind of did that. Like somebody else had to do the work to set that up in those communities. We're here. We have a good life here, you know, a good opportunity to kind of live and be comfortable and do things. So now that we've got that, how do we build on it? How do we make sure that we leave something behind so that the next person coming up, who could be a kid like me or could be anyone who's just like, well, wait a minute, I want to try to figure out how to, you know, further my journey or, you know, lay my claim to some piece of the world. But yeah, if I can leave them, you know, a little bit of a foundation that they can then build on, and then the next person can build on, that's the exciting work left ahead. So I've got a horizon line for myself in terms of what I can do with that. And I'm not saying I'm looking to stop anytime soon, but I think that horizon line is based on the idea that there's only so much that I need to be doing as sort of at the forefront of that.
Right.
You know, you have to do what you can do, but then recognize that the people coming up behind you are going to need to have the time and the space to pick it up and move from there. I don't need to continue doing stuff when there are people waiting behind me who have more energy and more passion and more knowledge that's going to push it even further. It's like, okay, once I've done what I can do, I'm ready to, I'll step aside, but I'm still going to journey with you. But I don't necessarily need to be at the forefront of that anymore, but I'll still be there to support it and do what I can and lend my hand or whatever it is I can offer. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that next phase of things. Mm-hmm. I'm not done with this one, but I
hear you.
But I do know that next phase is going to be really exciting, and I want it to be, if it's my kids or whoever I've had the opportunity to kind of help and touch along the way. Yeah, I want to see where they take it next.
I hear you. That's mirrors a lot of me and where I'm at. I still want to be there. I still want to be doing. I still want to. But sometimes when you do, you take up too much space, and you're taking up room that somebody else needs in order to get to do, and to do it better and to do it differently and everything else. So the other part is that I have to say is, you know, that there's the direct impact, and then there's also all the indirect ripples of what you're doing with this festival and so many other things that you're doing, you know, that you're changing your community. And the fact that you folks decided to stay there and stay put and not go where you could just enjoy maybe, but to continue to build and to better the community, that speaks a lot to who you are as well.
Well, we'll see. I mean, maybe, I haven't left the legacy yet, but somebody may look at the legacy and be like, what was this guy doing?
That's possible. That is always possible as well. Not a bad thing, you know.
I could screw it up in some way that people would be like, why were we following that guy? Like, who knows?
As I said in the beginning, I do have some great photos, and I did think about inserting one in particular in here of you at one of our retreats.
Oh God.
With a sparkly top hat and a cane and everything else. A character that you reprise several times in training, as I recall.
Yes,
So
yes,
you will
yes.
be remembered for that too.
Oh,
But I didn't include that in here, and I won't. Although if anybody wants that picture, just get in touch with me. So what are your driving passions, Terrence, Todd, TT?
yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I've probably talked all around it as part of this. Yeah, I mean, it's in part wanting to have an impact on things, but it's also just more of sharing sharing my journey and my experiences with people. You mentioned, the idea of interviewing someone who interviews people, and that is a part of my job now as a critic. And talking about film on TV and doing reviews and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a part of that, or at least when I first started, that I kind of assumed that I liked having that separation from people. I liked knowing that I could go into a theater, sit in the dark by myself, interact with the film, and then write about it and put that out into the world. And no one, people didn't know my name or that byline, or were necessarily relating it to me as a person. I could still walk down the street and it was no big deal. There was the anonymity of all of that. Moving to television, and especially now where I'm on basically 5 days a week talking about film every morning, what has happened is this idea now that people see me on the street and they'll say, "Hey, TT," or "Hey, movie guy, what's your favorite movie right now?" Or "What are you watching?" Or "Why did you like this movie over here?" And at first, that when people would kind of introduce themselves and start things off like that, it would really kind of freak me out. But I have now come to embrace that, and I'm excited about it now because it lets me know that A, people are paying attention and checking the stuff out, but B, it opens the door for real communication in ways that writing didn't necessarily do for the longest time. I was just putting my thoughts and opinions out there, and it was never a two-way street. With it being a two-way street now, as people come up to me on the street and want to talk about things, it is heartwarming in a way to know that, again, even during quarantine, if I'm out for a walk, and I've got a mask on or whatever, and people can still kind of recognize my hair or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, movie guy," I can still stop for a minute and say, "Hey, yeah, what was I talking about in particular that caught your attention?" Or more importantly, "What are you watching?" And in a lot of cases, people will tell me stuff that I haven't watched. They'll tell me about shows or whatever, and I'm like, "Okay, well, you know what? Hey, I need to check that out, and maybe I'll talk about it next week or a month from now or whatever else." And you'll know that it's because of you that I'm talking about this. And to have that opportunity kind of open up means that that's the way to engage with people. And I don't think that I knew how important that was until I found myself at this place in my life. The festival is struggling right now with marketing in terms of trying to promote me as an influencer and all these things that, we do because that's the language of the day. I don't know that calling someone an influencer or whatever has the same power and impact as just knowing that I'm just somebody that people see me talking about film and they know that I care about it. And yet they still feel comfortable enough to come up to me on the street to be able to say, hey, I like this thing that you liked, or I like this thing over here. Do you like it? At the end of the day, that's more important than anybody reading some highfalutin academic thing that I might have put out in the alt weekly, where they might read it, but they would feel like, okay, oh, he's a critic, and there's this distance between us. I am a critic, but at the end of the day, I'm just a dude who loves movies, and I've got a job where I get to watch way too much stuff, and I'm probably spending more time watching stuff than the average person, but there's something hopefully kind of accessible and relatable to me, because I can talk about like in the Fast and Furious movies or the Pitch Perfect movies, and people are like, oh, okay, so yeah, he likes that art, that art centric kind of stuff, but he's also he can kind of come down and hang out with us with the and then like, yeah, and we can talk about that. And if I can talk about those kinds of films with people, then maybe they might pay attention to me when I'm talking about a foreign language film or an art house indie film that they would not have even thought about checking out on their own, but they might say, oh, hey, TT like that, maybe I should check it out. And they'll also know that, hey, if I do check it out and I see him on the street, yeah, I can say, hey, I went and saw that Parasite movie that you were talking about, and you know what? Yeah, it was pretty good. I was like, okay, cool. Then I know that opens the world up, and that there's more that we can see and talk about and share together. And that is, at the end of the day, what's kind of driving me right now. That's the exciting thing that I never would have thought would have been that exciting to me 20 or 30 or even 40 years ago. But I do know now that it will probably be the important thing for me for the rest of my life. Yeah, I don't think that's going to change.
So I got to take you back. So to the first question. So who are you? Who is TT Stern-Enzi, Terrence Clinkscales?
I think I'll go back to what I said before. I am a son, a brother, a husband, a step parent, and maybe there's one other thing. I don't know if it's a label or how to define it necessarily, but I remember in the 90s, having conversations with people in the city and friends or whatever, and always trying to imagine maybe answering this kind of question, like, who do you think you are? Like, I think at the end of the day, I'm someone who's trying to be a good person. I don't know that I'm always successful by whatever measure that we have out there in the world, but I'm trying and I'm striving for that. I don't necessarily need to be a great person or brilliant or anything like that, but just trying to be a good person. Just because I think the best compliment that I can give anyone, and my wife has heard me say this a few times over the 14 years we've been married, like every once in a while, there'll be someone that I'll talk about and I'm like, you know what? They're good people. You don't get much better from me than just being good people. So if I could get to the end of my life and be able to look back and say, yeah, you know what, you were good people. That'd be it. Yeah, just good people.
Well, I think you're already there. You're good people in my book, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you. I mean, let me just say that, yeah, you're there for me. You're definitely there for me too. So I've been part of Thanksgiving and the season and everything else. It always leads me to these reflective kinds of moments and thinking about, again, the people that have had an impact in my life. And yeah, it's amazing to really take the time to think and to really reflect and be appreciative of, those people that have been kind of the markers in your life. And yeah, that I cannot thank you enough for being there in my life at the time that you were. And more importantly, as I just said in a message leading up to this, like, I'm glad we had the chance to reconnect. So often you think about those people and you're like, oh yeah, I miss them. And life keeps flowing and going and you don't have the chance to reconnect. But when you do get the chance to reconnect, it's even more special.
Absolutely.
So
I so agree. Thank you so much. Thanks for being you. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. Thanks for re-entering my life again, and for the work that's coming, and tease to those listening in. Some fun stuff coming up very shortly and more to come.
Definitely.
And hopefully here in Maui and there in Cincinnati and there in Philadelphia and who knows what all.
And who knows where else.
Absolutely. T, thank you so much.
This series on being a service warrior is brought to you by Networks for Training and Development Incorporated via funding by the Philadelphia and Northumberland Counties Behavioral Health Intellectual Disability Services in Pennsylvania, and with the help of Joe Sterling of Joe Doggy Productions, Waikapu, Hawaii. Many thanks to all our guests and fellow firewalkers for sharing their wisdom, learnings, and joy with us.